You served your country. You did your time, carried the weight, and when you came home, you were promised something. We'll take care of you. That was the deal. The one thing they told you wouldn't change no matter what. But right now, behind the headlines and the press conferences, that promise is getting gutted. The VA is cutting jobs. At first, they let go of 1,000 people, new hires, probationary employees, folks just getting their footing in the system. Then another 1,400 gone. Some of them, the ones working the Veterans Crisis Line, the ones who pick up the phone and talk you down because they know what it's like. And that's just getting started. The VA was about to cut $2 billion worth of contracts, slashing private healthcare partnerships, the very thing keeping veterans in rural areas or in overcrowded systems from waiting months just to see a doctor. They put those cuts on pause, but every day they are finding new ways to cut spending that directly impacts VA services. Meanwhile, the people in charge of keeping veterans' data safe, the cybersecurity teams that protect medical records, benefits, personal information, they're being laid off too, just fired, gone. And the research? The thing that makes the VA more than just a hospital system, the thing that pushes treatments forward, that develops better prosthetics, better PTSD care, better cancer treatments for the veterans exposed to toxic shit overseas. Without the support it needs from the NIH and CDC, it'd be undermined even if it weren't on the chopping block too. You might hear about these things in the news, one at a time, and think, yeah, that sucks, but that's government for you. They'll sort it out. But this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. The VA isn't a menu where you pick one service and move on. It's a system, a web where everything is connected. You start pulling at those threads and the whole damn thing starts coming apart. Veterans don't experience the VA in pieces. When you need help, you don't just need a doctor. You need your claim processed. You need your benefits in order. You need your records intact, your appointments scheduled, your referrals approved. When one of those things breaks, it slows the whole process down. When multiple things break, the system grinds to a halt. And when that happens, people suffer. People die. So, if you want to understand what these cuts really mean, you can't just look at them from the outside. You have to see them the way a veteran would, one step at a time through the system they have to navigate, through the walls they run into when the things they were promised start falling apart. That's what we're going to do here. We'll walk through 5 common scenarios for veterans, 5 different paths through the VA. We'll show you 5 ways these cuts are going to hit real people where it hurts. Consider James. He isn't the type to run to the doctor for every little thing. He's dealt with his share of aches and pains, comes with the territory after years of carrying gear, jumping in and out of trucks, breathing in God knows what overseas. But this is different. His chest has been feeling tight. He's been getting lightheaded, a little winded just walking across the yard. It's not bad, but it's enough that his wife tells him to get checked out. So he calls the VA hospital near him. The soonest they can see him is in 3 months. 3 months is a long time to sit around wondering if something's wrong. But he remembers hearing about community care, the program that's supposed to send him to a private doctor if the VA can't get him in soon enough. So he asks about that. That's where things start to go sideways. The guy on the phone says they're backed up on referrals. The office handling them lost staff in the recent layoffs, and they're swamped. Even if they process his request, there's no guarantee they'll find an available provider. A lot of the private doctors they used to work with aren't taking VA-covered patients anymore because the VA nearly cut their contracts completely. James asks how long it'll take to get a decision. Hard to say, the guy tells him. Maybe another month or 2. So now he's looking at 4, maybe 5 months just to sit down with a doctor. Not to get treated, not to get better, just to find out what's wrong. That's the moment it hits him. The system that's supposed to be helping him isn't working the way it's supposed to. And James? He's still sitting at home waiting. Lisa knew filing a VA claim was going to be a process. She just didn't think it would be this much of a process. She got out of the Army last year, spent most of her time in a maintenance unit, working on vehicles, hauling equipment, running convoys. It was hard on the body. Long days, heavy lifting, sleeping in whatever awkward position you could manage in the back of a truck. By the time she hit her last year of service, her knees were shot, her back was a mess, and the migraines that started after a bad fall weren't getting any better. So when she got out, she did what she was supposed to do. Filed her VA claim, went to the exams, got everything in the system, and then she waited. and waited, and waited. She called to check on it, sat on hold for an hour, finally got through to someone who sounded like they'd had this conversation 100 times already that day. They told her they were working through a backlog. The office handling claims had laid off staff in the last round of cuts and the people left were swamped. She asked how long it was going to take. Hard to say, the rep told her. Could be another few months. That was a problem. Her claim wasn't just about a disability check. It was the key to everything else. Without a rating, she couldn't enroll in VA healthcare without paying out of pocket. Without a rating, she couldn't get into the VA's vocational rehab program to train for a new job. Everything she planned for, all of it was stuck, waiting on that one decision. So now, she's in limbo. She's been picking up shifts at a warehouse just to keep the bills paid, even though her back screams at her every time she lifts a box. She's rationing out the last of her meds from her military doctor because she doesn't know when she'll get in to see a VA provider. She's skipping meals some nights to stretch out her savings because she's running out of options and there's no telling when the VA will come through. She did everything right, followed all the steps, but the system that's supposed to be helping her is too broken to keep up. So she's struggling. David doesn't go out much these days. His knees aren't what they used to be, and the nerve pain in his hands makes it tough to grip things for too long. But that's all right. He's got his routine. Every month, his VA disability payment hits his account. He pays his rent, picks up his prescriptions, keeps the lights on. Nothing fancy, just enough to live. So when he logs into his bank account one morning and sees that the deposit never came through, his first thought is that it must be a glitch. It's happened before, just a delay, nothing to panic about. He gives it a day, then another, but when he checks again, his balance isn't just short, it's empty. Now he's panicking. He calls his bank. They tell him the money was withdrawn the same day it was deposited, transferred out, gone. He doesn't recognize the account it went to. They tell him to contact the VA, so he does. And after hours on hold, he finally gets someone on the line who tells him his direct deposit information was changed in the system last month. His payments have been going to another account, one he's never seen before. David didn't change anything. Turns out he was hacked, and he's not the only one. The VA's system has security vulnerabilities now, because the people in charge of keeping it locked down, the cybersecurity teams, have been laid off. Before the cuts, the VA had teams monitoring for fraud, checking for unusual activity, flagging and stopping unauthorized changes to veterans' accounts before the money was gone. But when the layoffs hit, those teams got gutted. Fewer people checking, fewer security updates, more gaps in the system. Scammers noticed, and they took advantage. The rep tells them they'll start an investigation, but it could take months to sort out. In the meantime, there's nothing they can do. Nothing. David hangs up the phone and just sits there, staring at the wall. His rent is due next week. His meds aren't cheap. And his savings? That was his savings. He served his country, put in his time. And now in his 70s, he's sitting in his own home, wondering if he's about to lose it all, because the system that was supposed to protect him let this happen. And David? He's still fighting. Angela knew something was wrong before the doctors did. She spent years on the flight line in the Air Force, working near the burn pits. Massive, smoldering piles of burning garbage, jet fuel, plastics, chemicals. Nobody wore masks, nobody asked questions, it was just part of the job. Now, years later, she wakes up coughing so hard she sees stars. The migraines are getting worse. Her joints ache in ways that don't make sense for her age. Every time she hears about another veteran from her unit getting diagnosed with cancer, that little voice in the back of her head gets louder. So she goes to the VA. They run tests. The doctor tells her the same thing she's heard before. We're still learning about the long-term effects of burn pit exposure. We can help manage your symptoms, but we don't have a clear treatment yet. Angela asks about new treatments, clinical trials, anything that might stop this before it gets worse. The doctor sighs. There was a study looking into targeted therapies for toxic exposure, but it lost funding last year. VA research took some big cuts, and a lot of those projects got shelved. That's the first failure. The research that should have led to better treatments never got the chance. Still, she tries to stay hopeful. The VA is a massive system. Maybe there's still something out there. The doctor refers her to a specialist, but when she calls, she hits another wall. The clinic she needs has a 6-month waitlist because the program that fast-tracked toxic exposure cases lost funding too. Before the cuts, they had extra staff and resources to keep things moving. Now, she's just another name in the queue. That's the second failure. Even the existing treatments are harder to access now. So she goes home with an inhaler, some pain meds, and instructions to come back if things get worse. But she already knows how this ends. Without real treatment, without real answers, she's just waiting to become another statistic. Another veteran whose life is shortened not just by the exposure, but by the years wasted waiting for care that never came. That's the third failure. Long-term veteran health outcomes get worse and nobody pays the price except the veterans themselves. And Angela, without work on cures, she's still dying. Mike has been trying to push through it. He got out of the Guard 2 years ago, and at first it wasn't bad. A little stress, a little trouble sleeping. He told himself it was nothing. Everyone feels off sometimes. It wasn't like he had full-blown PTSD. It wasn't like he was broken. But then the bad nights turned into bad weeks. He was angry all the time, snapping at people over nothing. Couldn't concentrate at work, couldn't sleep. And underneath it all, there was this constant weight in his chest, like something was pressing down on him, making it harder and harder to breathe. So he did what he was supposed to do. He reached out. He called his local VA clinic to make an appointment with the therapist. They told him the soonest they could get him in was 6 weeks out. 6 weeks. He didn't even know if he could get through this week. So he tried a vet center instead. He'd heard they were more flexible, easier to get into. But when he called, they told him they were at capacity. Too many veterans, not enough staff. He could check back in a few months. That was failure number 2. He thought about trying a private counselor, but his insurance wouldn't cover much, and he didn't have the cash to pay out of pocket every week. Failure number 3. So he waited. Tried to push through. But every day it got harder. The weight didn't lift. The walls just kept closing in. And tonight, sitting alone in his apartment, staring at nothing, he knows he can't do this on his own anymore. He needs to talk to someone, now. That's what the Veterans Crisis Line is for. It's supposed to be there 24/7, no waiting, no red tape. Someone who gets it. Someone who can talk him through this. So he calls, and the phone rings, and rings, and rings. What he doesn't know, what no one told him, is that the crisis line was one of the first things to take a hit in the layoffs. The VA let go of dozens of responders, fewer people answering. Wait times have doubled, so that phone is still ringing. These stories haven't happened yet, but they describe the situations of thousands of veterans who could be facing them in no time. Because these cuts aren't just inconveniences. They aren't just forcing veterans to wait a little longer, jump through a few more hoops, or deal with a little more frustration. They are weakening the entire system in ways that will compound and reinforce each other until real harm is unavoidable. It starts with bottlenecks. The VA has fewer people processing disability claims, so veterans wait months to get a rating. Without that rating, they can't access VA health care. So they turn to community care referrals, only to find those are backlogged too because the referral offices lost staff as well. By the time they get an appointment, their condition is worse, their options fewer, and the costs higher. This isn't just a slow system, it's a system actively making veterans sicker and poorer while it tries to catch up. And when those delays create emergencies, the safety nets are already fraying. The crisis line is short-staffed, which means veterans in crisis sit on hold instead of talking to someone who can help. The vet centers are at capacity, turning people away at the door. The specialized care clinics veterans finally get referrals to? Underfunded and overbooked. When one part of the system is weakened, the burden doesn't just disappear, it shifts onto something else that was never meant to handle it. Meanwhile, the long-term damage is already taking root. The research that should be developing new cancer treatments, better PTSD therapies, and cutting-edge prosthetics for injured veterans is being pushed aside, stalled, or outright abandoned. That means today's problems will still be problems 10 years from now, and veterans who could have had better options will never see them because no one finished the work. And as all of this plays out, the worst failure is happening quietly. Veterans are starting to give up on the system entirely. Some will take out loans for private care, spending money they shouldn't have to spend. Some will avoid doctors altogether, ignoring problems until it's too late. Some won't call for help when they need it, convinced that no one is listening anyway. That's how a system dies. Not all at once. Piece by piece, service by service, cut by cut. And that's exactly what's happening, because no one in Washington is going to stand up and say they're cutting health care for veterans. Instead, they're cutting everything around it and watching it collapse under its own weight. But here's the part they didn't count on. You're paying attention. And now that you see how this plays out, you don't have to sit back and let it happen. Because the people making these decisions, they think you'll stay quiet. They think veterans will do what they always do: grit their teeth, push through, and survive no matter how much the system fails them. That's why this can't stop here. The VA's phone lines have gone silent. Now it's time to make some noise somewhere else. Call your representative. Call your senator. They're counting on your silence. Don't let their phones stop ringing.